What is up, y'all? Glad to see you here today. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I use the GH5 for shooting concerts and live shows. This camera has become my go-to workhorse for all sorts of gigs, but I love it for live events. So there's generally two types of live shows you might be recording. One would be an actual live music video where it's a continuous recording, multiple camera angles of the band for them to post on YouTube or something like that. That's not so much what I'm talking about today. While this setup would work for that, I'm focusing more on highlight reels. So this would be a festival highlight reel or just an event highlight reel, really focusing on just having one camera rig that's doing all the work for the video. For that, I like to use the trusty GH5. I've been using this rig for a couple years now, switching it up as new pieces of gear have come into my setup, and I've settled on something that I really like for recording live shows. The most important thing about a live gig and the equipment that you're using is that you're light and nimble, especially if it's a multi-day festival where you're going to be carrying around all of your gear throughout the day. You want something that you can have in your hand and is not going to weight you down too much, make your arms super tired, because you want to be able to, quickly go up, capture that shot, and make sure that you're getting those moments that are really going to make your final video really something nice. So having something that I can carry with me all the time, don't have to put it in my bag, is number one on my list. Another one of the things I love about this camera is the image stabilization. It's got an in-body stabilizer as well as lens stabilization when you're using native glass, and these will work together to give you almost gimbal-like shots when you're handheld. And so this can be really nice when you're run and gun. You don't need to always set up a monopod or something like that to be able to get a fairly stable shot that's usable. I really love the 4K capabilities of this camera. I'm always shooting everything in 4K, and that gives me the ability to actually crop in later because I'd rather make sure I capture the moment than have it perfectly framed. You try to get that shot as framed as well as you can, but maybe there's something distracting on the left-hand side that you want to be able to crop out in post, and having 4K to do that is really, really handy. And on top of the 4K, the GH5 has this digital teleconvert feature that actually still lets you shoot a full resolution, perfect quality 4K image, but it crops in further on the sensor, and so you get an extra bit of reach with your lenses. So if you can't quite get as close to the action as you'd like, you pop on the digital converter and you've got a 4K file that looks like it was shot with a longer focal length lens than what you might actually have. One feature of the GH5 that I think you really can't underestimate for shooting live events is Synchros Scan. This allows you to adjust the shutter angle of your camera in very small degrees. And so without getting into the details of what your shutter angle is, the important thing to understand is when you're at a live event, there's going to be different types of lights, and they're usually going to be LED, and they're going to have different rates of flicker to them. And when you're shooting at 1/50th of a second or 180 degree shutter, you're going to see some of that flicker showing up in the footage, particularly noticeable if you're going to slow that footage down in post if you're shooting at 60p or something like that. And so you can adjust with the Synchros Scan your shutter angle to match that of the lights that are in the space, so you remove that flicker completely. It's not always possible because there's different lighting sources and different lights have different flicker rates, and so I'll usually just go for whatever light is the dominant one in the scene and try to adjust my angle so I'm not capturing anything else that might be flickering. But it's really, really annoying if you've got flickering footage, and it's tough to fix it in post, so it's really great if you can get it right in the camera. So I love this feature. I use it at every single live event that I shoot at. I think most people know the big downside of the GH5 is its low light capabilities. You really don't want to go over about 1600 ISO before your footage just starts to fall apart completely. I try to stay between 800 and 1200 in most situations. You can use the GH5S as a way to get around this, but you lose the image stabilization capabilities of the GH5 that I really love. And so I've opted to get around this by using lenses that give me good wide open apertures that I can capture as much light as possible so I don't need to bump my ISO too high. When you're shooting a live event, there's really two main things you're trying to capture. You want to capture the environment and the overall scene that's happening in front of you, and then you want to capture those intimate moments that are going to give the viewer that emotional connection to the festival and make them want to show up at the next one. And so to get those, you really need to get close to the action. So we have a combination of a need for wide, big views and really close telephoto views. You want to be able to get close to that band that's playing or close to that person that's dancing. And so I use two lenses to achieve this. First one being the Sigma 18 to 35. I think most people know about this lens. It's a bit big, which is the one thing I don't love about it, but the wide open aperture I get with this on a speed booster is totally worth it. So this will be an f1.3 with the speed booster, which gives me plenty of ability to shoot at ISO 800 in most circumstances. And so this is what I'll use for those wide shots of the show, of the band, whatever I might need. The downside of this lens is we've got no image stabilization inside the lens, so we're just relying on the body for all the image stabilization. But really great lens, and it's what I always start my show with on my camera. The other lens that I really like to use is the 35 to 100 Panasonic f2.8. This is my telephoto that I end up throwing on to get those shots of the band if I can't get really close on the stage, or if I really want to compress the crowd to make it feel like it's a busier show than it is. Maybe there's not a lot of people, but you still want to give that energy of a show. You put this on your camera and you can compress that entire crowd into a smaller space, and it will actually make the show feel more bustling. This is a 2.8 aperture, so you do have some of those issues with low light, but the reach that it gives you with a 2x crop on the GH5 is the equivalent of a 200 millimeter lens, and it's just tiny. So I think it is worth it for that reason. And I really only need these two lenses to pull off my shoot. I can get my wide stuff with the Sigma, I can get my close stuff with the Panasonic lens, and I can use that extended teleconvert feature to get a little bit closer if I'm just not able to quite reach where I want to reach. So a new part of my setup is the Ninja 5. I find this field recorder an essential part of my process. I have a 1 terabyte SSD hard drive I'm recording into, and then it's also just acting as my field monitor for checking focus, checking my framing, all that sort of stuff. It mounts really nice onto my cage, and I have a really solid rig that actually is quite comfortable in the hands. I can push this all the way forward and I get a real nice viewing angle, or if I need to get an overhead shot, I can tip it back and bring it up overhead. And so I get a really nice range of flexibility with this mount, and I get really high quality footage. I shoot into ProRes either LT or ProRes 422 depending on the length of the event. If it's a shorter event, I'll usually do 422. If it's something longer where I need more memory, I'll shoot in LT just to save on memory a little bit. Both of these are really nice codecs that give you a lot of range in post to be able to push colors around. I find that when I have noisy footage, the extra megabits that I'm getting recording into an external recorder like this really help not have that noise look so crunchy. It's less pixelated to begin with, and so I think it's easier to grade that footage and make it look good in post. I do have an SD card that I keep inside the camera that I'm recording to in addition. This is giving me backup for all of my footage except my 10-bit 4K 60p footage, which you cannot record internal with the GH5. So it's just an important thing to remember that if something did happen to your SSD in the Ninja, that you would lose all of that footage. But all of your 24 4K footage will be backed up on the SD card as well. Well, I don't generally need to record audio at these sorts of events because I'm just splicing together a highlight reel and there'll be a single track that backs the whole thing. I do put the Rode Videomicro on this. It fits really well and it gives me higher quality audio than what would be internal to the camera. The reason I do this is because I often will talk to the band after the show and they'll say, hey, did you get any good footage of us? Can you send that to us? We could use it on social media. And if I have this on here, I actually do have footage that the band could find useful. And I'll generally just put that together for them, do a really quick color grade on it so they have something that looks good, that I'm comfortable with them crediting me for giving them that footage. But then that actually leads to more gigs often. I find that if you're generous with the bands in this way, they see that your work is really good. They might actually contact you to shoot a live show, do a music video, all of that sort of stuff. So the footage is already recorded. Why not share it? There's no point in me just hoarding it from the band. And so putting a microphone on your camera gives you the ability to have footage that somebody else can use at the end of the day. As I mentioned, everything on this is hooked to a cage. This is the small rig cage. It's just a cheaper one that does the job really well. Got a couple small rig components on here to mount the Ninja 5. The only other piece of this setup that I don't have in front of me now is my monopod. I use a monopod that has a tripod base, and this is just to be able to get some shots that are more stable than if I was hand holding the entire event. I don't use it all the time, but if I'm not going to be moving around a lot, it's nice to be able to lock the camera down and do some nice slow pans and things like that. I don't generally bring a gimbal. I do often throw it in my vehicle and leave it there in case maybe there's something that would just be like that perfect shot with the gimbal, but I don't want to carry it around throughout the whole festival. I want to go out and do some dancing and enjoy myself as well. And so just adding more and more pieces of gear that don't necessarily make me tell a better story of what happened at that event just seems like unnecessary to me. So the gimbal generally stays in the car or just stays at home completely, and I do everything handheld. So that is it. That is how I rig out my GH5 for shooting live shows. I hope you got something out of this and you see some gear that might help fill out your setup for shooting these types of events. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, I hope you'll think about hitting that subscribe button down below. Drop me a comment if you're wondering about any of the pieces of gear. I didn't talk about every small little piece of this setup, but just the overview. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer those. But until the next video, get out there, make something beautiful, and I'll see y'all soon. Peace.